In the summer of 1867, in a quiet farming settlement outside Sedalia, Missouri, an 8-year-old boy named Timothy Caldwell became the focus of what would later be described as one of the most unsettling medical investigations ever recorded in the American Midwest. Dr. Samuel Harding, the area's only formally trained physician, filled 3 leather-bound journals documenting a child whose behavior defied every known understanding of human nature in 19th century medicine. To most people, Timothy appeared ordinary, pleasant, even endearing. But beneath that harmless surface lurked something deeply wrong, something the science of the time could not explain. Over the course of 6 months, 3 people died in strange accidents linked by one constant presence. Dozens of farm animals were discovered dead under unexplained circumstances. In total, 11 individuals, all of whom had crossed paths with Timothy Caldwell, would be connected to a chain of events so disturbing that local authorities sealed the records and hid them away for more than a century. What those forgotten documents reveal is a darkness that challenges everything we believe about innocence and the capacity for evil in childhood. Before we continue the story of Timothy Caldwell and the fear that consumed Sedalia County, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. And let us know in the comments which state or city you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of mystery lovers around the world. The events that would eventually make Timothy Caldwell infamous did not begin with violence, but with loss. Missouri in 1867 was still scarred by the Civil War. Small towns like Sedalia had sent their sons to distant battlefields, many of whom never returned. The result was a land filled with widows, orphans, and broken families struggling to survive. The Caldwell farm, located in a shallow valley 15 miles south of town, had once been a thriving operation. James and Martha Caldwell had built it with hopes of raising cattle and growing corn, dreams that ended when James was killed at the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861. Martha tried to keep the farm running on her own, but consumption slowly destroyed her lungs, and she died during the brutal winter of 1865. Their surviving son, Thomas, only 21 years old, inherited land he lacked the strength to work and debts he could not repay. Then came word that his brother William had died at Andersonville prison, leaving behind a widow and an 8-year-old son. To Thomas, the boy was both a responsibility and opportunity. Timothy needed a home, and the farm desperately needed labor. Thomas Caldwell was a hardened man, shaped by war and grief. His wife Sarah, embittered by years of hardship and the pain of childlessness, had grown sharp-tempered. Neither of them was prepared to raise a child, especially one who arrived at their door in the spring of 1866 carrying nothing but a small cloth bag and eyes that seemed far too old for his face. Timothy was undersized for his age, pale-skinned and easily burned by the Missouri sun. His blonde hair was kept cropped short by his aunt to prevent lice. When questioned about his past, he offered only brief, fragmented answers. His father had been a soldier. His mother had coughed blood. After her death, he had stayed with neighbors for a time. What most adults noticed about Timothy was his manners. He was unfailingly polite, always answering with yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. He never complained about work, punishment, or hunger. By all outward measures, he seemed to be the ideal child. Dr. Samuel Harding first met Timothy in June of 1866, when the boy accompanied his uncle into town for supplies. Harding, a graduate of the Missouri Medical College and one of the few formally trained physicians west of St. Louis, had spent years treating wounded Union and Confederate soldiers. Those years had sharpened his ability to read people. Something about Timothy unsettled him immediately. The child was entirely respectful, Harding later wrote in his journal. He answered questions clearly, maintained steady eye contact, and showed none of the nervousness common to rural children encountering strangers. And yet, I felt an unmistakable unease in his presence. His gaze suggested not curiosity, but observation, as though he were examining me with the same clinical interest I reserve for my patients. Sedalia's farming community was small, and isolation did little to keep secrets. Though the Caldwell farm sat apart from others, neighbors still noticed oddities. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose land bordered the Caldwell property, frequently observed Timothy working in the fields or tending livestock. She commented to her husband that the boy labored with a focus unnatural for someone so young, and never pausing to play, never slowing, never showing fatigue. It was like watching a little machine, she told her husband one evening. From sunrise to sunset he worked without complaint. Ain't natural for a boy to have no play in him at all. The Pattersons kept chickens, and Eleanor soon noticed something else. Whenever Timothy approached the fence separating their properties, the birds grew restless. They huddled together, squawking loudly, feathers bristling, refusing to move closer to the bound area as if sensing something they could not say. Her husband dismissed it as coincidence, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the animals sensed something about the boy that humans missed. The first death occurred on a sweltering afternoon in August 1866. Little Mary Fletcher, age 5, was the daughter of the town blacksmith and known throughout the community for her bright laugh and tendency to wander. She had been playing near Willow Creek, a shallow stream that ran between several properties, including the Caldwell farm. Timothy found her body. He arrived at the Fletcher home just as the family was preparing for supper, his clothes damp and his face pale with what appeared to be genuine distress. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious agitation. "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." The search party that rushed to the creek found Mary Fletcher face down in water barely 18 in deep. Dr. Harding, summoned immediately, determined that the child had drowned, a tragic but not uncommon accident in rural areas where children played unsupervised near water. What troubled Harding was not the death itself, but Timothy's account of discovering the body. The boy provided an unusually detailed description of exactly where Mary had been found, the position of her body, and the condition of her clothing. When pressed about how he had come to be in that particular spot at that particular time, Timothy explained that he had been looking for a lost calf. The boy's recall was remarkably precise. Harding noted in his journal he could describe the exact position of the deceased child's limbs, the way her dress had been caught on a submerged branch, even the color of the water around her face. Such attention to detail seemed unusual for a child who claimed to be frightened and upset by the discovery. Thomas Caldwell, when questioned, confirmed that one of their calves had indeed gone missing that morning, and that he had sent Timothy to search the creek area. The calf was found 2 days later, healthy and grazing in a meadow nearly a mile from where Mary Fletcher had drowned. The Fletcher family, devastated by their loss, received Timothy's sympathy with gratitude. He had, after all, been the one to find their daughter and alert them immediately. At the funeral, Timothy sat quietly with his aunt and uncle. His head bowed respectfully throughout the service. When the family thanked him for his quick action in alerting them, he accepted their gratitude with appropriate solemnity. "I wish I could have found her sooner," he told Mary's father, his voice carrying just the right note of regret and sorrow. But Eleanor Patterson, watching from across the church, noticed something that nagged at her for days afterward. When Mary Fletcher's mother collapsed in grief during the service, when the sight of the small coffin reduced grown men to tears, Timothy Caldwell's expression never changed. His head was bowed in apparent sorrow, but when he thought no one was looking, his pale blue eyes remained dry and watchful, taking in every detail of the scene round him. The second death came 3 weeks later. Old Henrik Len, a Norwegian immigrant who had worked as a logger before arthritis forced him into retirement, was found at the bottom of a rocky outcrop known locally as Devil's Bluff. The bluff overlooked the creek where Mary Fletcher had drowned, and Henrik was known to climb there regularly to check on the wild beehives he tended. Once again, Timothy Caldwell was involved in the discovery. He had been walking home from town when he spotted something unusual at the base of the bluff. "I saw Miss Dilson's hat caught on a thorn bush," Timothy told the gathering crowd. "I called out to him, but got no answer, so I climbed down to look." Henrik Larsson was dead. his neck broken from what appeared to be a fall from the top of the 40-feet bluff. Dr. Harding's examination revealed that the old man had likely died instantly upon impact. The only unusual aspect of the scene was the presence of several dead bees scattered around the body, far more than would typically be found away from a hive. Mr. Larson knew those bluffs better than any man in the county. Samuel Patterson told Dr. Harding after the examination he'd been climbing up for 3 years. Never had so much as a stumble. Don't make sense he'd fall now. Timothy, when questioned, suggested that perhaps the old man had been stung by bees and lost his footing. He was always talking about how angry they get when you disturb them, the boy said. Maybe they swarmed him and he got confused. Dr. Harding found Timothy's explanation plausible, but something about the scene bothered him. The dead bees were all clustered in a small area directly around Henrik's body. If the old man had disturbed a hive at the top of the bluff, there should have been more evidence of bee activity along his presumed path of flight and fall. Instead, it appeared as though the bees had somehow been concentrated around the impact site. When Harding climbed to the top of the bluff to examine the beehives, he found them intact and showing no signs of recent disturbance. The worker bees were active but not agitated, going about their normal business of gathering nectar from the late summer wildflowers. The third death shattered any illusions about coincidence. In September 1866, 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished while playing in the woods near his family's cabin. His body was found 4 days later in an abandoned well nearly half a mile from where he had last been seen. Timothy Caldwell had volunteered to join the search party. For 3 days, Timothy searched alongside the adult volunteers, showing remarkable endurance for a child his age. He seemed to know the woods intimately, guiding searchers through areas that even long-time residents found difficult to navigate. When asked how he had learned the terrain so well, Timothy explained that he often explored the woods during his free time, looking for useful plants and herbs that his aunt could use for cooking and medicine. On the 4th day, Timothy appeared at the Mills cabin just after dawn. "I think I found something," he told Jacob's father, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "There's an old well about a half-mile north of here. I heard what sounded like crying." The well was partially concealed by fallen logs and overgrown brush. Jacob Mills was at the bottom, alive but barely conscious, suffering from dehydration and exposure. Dr. Harding was summoned immediately, but the boy died within hours of being pulled from the well, his small body unable to recover from the ordeal. The child had been at the bottom of that well for nearly 4 days. Harding wrote in his journal. The fact that Timothy Caldwell was able to locate him in such an obscure location raises troubling questions. How extensive is the boy's knowledge of the local terrain? What other hidden dangers might he be aware of? More troubling still was Timothy's behavior during Jacob's final hours. While the Mills family maintained a vigil around their dying son, Timothy sat quietly in the corner of the cabin, apparently praying. But Dr. Harding, positioned where he could observe the boy without being noticed, saw something that deeply disturbed him. Timothy wasn't praying. His lips were moving, but his eyes were fixed on Jacob Mills with an intensity that seemed almost scientific. He appeared to be cataloguing every detail of the dying child's condition. The labored breathing, the pale skin, the way consciousness flickered in and out. When Jacob finally died, Timothy's expression showed no grief or shock. Instead, there was something that Harding could only describe as satisfaction. After the funeral, Dr. Harding made an excuse to visit the abandoned well where Jacob had been found. The site troubled him for reasons he couldn't articulate. The well was indeed well hidden, concealed by natural debris that would have taken considerable effort to move. Yet Timothy had claimed to hear crying from this location, a claim that seemed improbable given the depth of the well and the amount of brush covering it. As Harding examined the scene more carefully, he noticed something that the initial rescue party had missed in their urgency to save Jacob Mills. Around the rim of the well, the debris had been arranged with unusual precision. Logs and branches that should have fallen randomly showed signs of deliberate placement, creating a natural-looking camouflage that would be nearly impossible to spot unless one knew exactly where to look. The implications were too disturbing to voice aloud, but Harding could not shake the suspicion that Jacob Mills had not simply fallen into the well. Someone had placed him there, and someone had carefully concealed the location until the boy was too weak to survive rescue. That evening, Harding began keeping detailed notes about Timothy Caldwell. If his suspicions were correct, the boy posed a danger to the entire community. But suspicions were not evidence, and evidence was exactly what Harding lacked. The problem was that Timothy Caldwell was by all appearances a model child. He attended church regularly with his aunt and uncle, sitting quietly through services and reciting prayers with appropriate reverence. He worked diligently on the farm, completing tasks that would challenge many adult workers. He spoke respectfully to his elders and showed proper deference to authority figures. Most importantly, Timothy had plausible explanations for his presence at each tragedy. He had been looking for a lost calf when he found Mary Fletcher. He had been walking home from town when he spotted Henry Clenn's hat. He had volunteered to help search for Jacob Mills, as any concerned member of the community would do. But Harding's medical training had taught him to look beyond surface appearances. In treating wounded soldiers, he had learned to recognize the signs of men who killed not from patriotic duty or desperate necessity, but from something darker and more fundamental. There was a coldness in such men, a disconnection from normal human emotion that manifested in subtle ways: too little reaction to horror, too much interest in suffering, an ability to discuss violence with clinical detachment. Timothy Caldwell displayed all of these characteristics, but compressed into the body and face of an 8-year-old child. Dr. Harding's investigation began in earnest in October 1866. Using his position as the community's physician, he made regular visits to farms and homes throughout the area, ostensibly checking on the health of families still recovering from the hardships of war. In reality, he was gathering information about Timothy Caldwell. What he discovered painted a disturbing picture of a child who seemed to exist at the center of an ever-widening circle of misfortune. Livestock on neighboring farms had been dying at unusual rates, not from disease, but from what appeared to be accidental injuries. Chickens were found with broken necks, apparently killed by foxes that left no other signs of predation. Pigs suffered mysterious wounds that became infected and led to death. Horses developed sudden lameness that forced farmers to put them down. Mrs. Elalina Patterson confided to Drive Harding that she had lost 17 chickens in the past 2 months. "It's the strangest thing," she said. "They're dying 1 or 2 at a time, always found in the morning with their necks broken clean. My husband thinks it's foxes, but I've never seen fox sign around the coop. And the way they're killed, it's too neat, too." When Harding examined the most recent casualties, he found evidence that supported Eleanor's suspicions. The chickens had been killed with precise force applied to specific points on their necks, a technique that required considerable knowledge of anatomy. It was not the random violence typical of predator attacks, but something much more deliberate and controlled. Similar patterns emerged on other farms. James Wickham had lost 3 calves to what he described as freak accidents. Animals that had somehow managed to strangle themselves on ropes or wedge their heads in fence rails in ways that defied logical explanation. Robert Dunham's prize bull had fallen into a ditch and broken its leg despite being one of the most sure-footed animals in the county. In every case, the affected farms were within walking distance of the Caldwell property, and in several instances, neighbors reported seeing Timothy in the vicinity around the time of the incident. "I saw him walking along our fence line the morning before we found the calf," James Wickham told Dr. Harding. "Thought it was odd, him being so far from home, but the boy was always polite when he saw me, waved, and called out a greeting like he was taught proper." Dr. Harding also began paying closer attention to Timothy's behavior during his routine medical visits to the Caldwell farm. The boy was always present during these visits, standing quietly while Drive Harding examined his aunt and uncle for the various ailments common to farming life. But Harding noticed that Timothy watched these examinations with unusual interest, asking questions about anatomy and medical procedures that seemed advanced for a child his age. "How do you know if someone's really dead?" Timothy asked during one visit. his tone casual as if discussing the weather. Sometimes people just look like they're sleeping. When pressed to explain his curiosity, Timothy said he was concerned about being able to help if someone was hurt while he was alone on the farm. Uncle Thomas says, "I need to know how to handle emergencies since we're so far from town," he explained. The explanation was reasonable, but something about the question disturbed Dr. Harding. There was a clinical quality to Timothy's interest in death and injury that went beyond normal childhood curiosity. The boy asked about the mechanics of dying, how long it took, what signs to look for, whether people could survive various types of trauma with the same detached interest that a medical student might show when studying cadavers. During these conversations, Harding began testing Timothy's knowledge with deliberately false information, claiming that certain injuries were fatal when they were not, or that specific symptoms indicated particular conditions. Timothy never challenged these false statements directly, but Harding noticed that the boy filed away every piece of information with remarkable retention. More disturbing still was Timothy's response to Dr. Harding's stories about treating wounded soldiers during the war. While most children showed appropriate shock or sadness when hearing about battlefield injuries, Timothy listened with rapt attention, asking detailed questions about wound patterns, blood loss, and survival rates. "Did they scream a lot when you cut off their arms?" Timothy asked during one such conversation, his pale blue eyes fixed intently on Dr. Harding's face. "Or were they too hurt to make noise?" The question delivered in Timothy's characteristically polite tone sent a chill through Dr. Harding that he would never forget. By November 1866, Dr. Harding had filled nearly 2 complete journals with observations about Timothy Caldwell. The picture that emerged was that of a child who possessed an adult's understanding of violence and death, combined with a complete absence of normal human empathy. But documentation was not the same as evidence, and evidence was what Harding would need if he hoped to protect the community from what he increasingly believed was a dangerous predator. The opportunity to gather that evidence came when Thomas Caldwell injured his back during the fall harvest. The injury required bed rest and daily medical visits, giving Dr. Harding unprecedented access to the Caldwell household. During these visits, he began engaging Timothy in longer conversations, carefully probing to understand the extent of the boy's knowledge and the nature of his thoughts. What he discovered exceeded his worst fears. Timothy Caldwell had been conducting experiments on living creatures for months, possibly years, using a combination of careful questioning and direct observation. Dr. Harding determined that the boy had been systematically capturing and torturing small animals, studying their responses to various forms of injury and distress. Timothy had mentioned the cave during one of their conversations, describing it as a place where he went to think and be alone. When Dr. Harding investigated the site, he found a carefully organized collection of animal bones, crude surgical instruments fashioned from farm tools, and a series of detailed drawings that documented various experiments in torture and mutilation. The drawings were the most disturbing discovery. Rendered with surprising artistic skill for a child, they showed rabbits, squirrels, birds, and larger animals in various stages of dissection and injury. Each drawing was accompanied by notes written in Timothy's careful handwriting describing the animal's reactions, the time it took to die, and observations about which methods caused the most suffering. Subject remained conscious for approximately 10 minutes after removal of eyes. Read 1 notation beside a detailed drawing of a rabbit. Vocalizations decreased gradually. He was also faster and more agile, and he fought with the calculated precision of someone who had studied anatomy extensively. Dr. Harding managed to grab Timothy's wrist and twist until the boy dropped the knife, but Timothy immediately produced another blade from his clothing. It became clear that the boy had prepared multiple weapons and positioned them strategically throughout the house. The sound of their fight brought Sheriff Crawford and his deputies running from their concealed positions. They burst through the back door to find Dr. Harding struggling with Timothy while Thomas and Sarah Caldwell lay unconscious on their bed, apparently unaware of the violence occurring around them. Deputy Mitchell quickly subdued Timothy while Dr. Harding caught his breath and checked on the unconscious couple. When the dust settled, Timothy Caldwell sat calmly in the corner of the room, his clothes torn and his face blooded, but his pale blue eyes still holding that same cold intelligence that had first disturbed Dr. Harding so many months earlier. "You can't prove anything," Timothy said as the deputies secured him with ropes. "Nobody will believe that a child did all those things." Sheriff Crawford looked down at the boy with a mixture of disgust and fascination. "Maybe not," he said. "But we don't have to prove everything. Attempting to murder your family is enough to see you locked up regardless of your age." Timothy smiled at that. The same genuine expression of emotion that Dr. Harding had seen the day before. "You won't hang me," he said with absolute confidence. "I'm too young and I'm too interesting. Someone will want to study me instead." Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Sedalia County intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. Timothy Caldwell was wrong about his fate, but right about the impossibility of proving his crimes. When Sheriff Crawford attempted to present the evidence from the cave to county prosecutors, he encountered exactly the resistance that Dr. Harding had predicted. The drawings and notes were dismissed as the products of a disturbed child acting out trauma from his parents' deaths. The pattern of accidents and deaths was attributed to coincidence compounded by Timothy's unfortunate habit of being helpful during emergencies. The attempted murder of Thomas and Sarah Caldwell, however, could not be explained away. 3 law enforcement officers had witnessed Timothy attacking his sleeping relatives with clear intent to kill. Even the most sympathetic observers could not argue that an 8-year-old boy would attack family members with a knife unless something fundamental was wrong with his character. The legal system of 1867 had no framework for dealing with violent children. Timothy was too young for adult prosecution, but too dangerous for simple placement in an orphanage or reformatory. The case created unprecedented challenges for Missouri's justice system, attracting attention from legal scholars and medical professionals throughout the region. After weeks of legal wrangling and consultation with experts from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia, a compromise was reached. Timothy would be remanded to the custody of the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane in Fulton, where he would be studied and treated by the most advanced alienists available in the region. The decision satisfied no one completely. Prosecutors wanted Timothy tried as an adult for murder, while defense attorneys argued that no child so young could be held responsible for his actions. Medical professionals were divided between those who believed Timothy could be rehabilitated and those who considered him incurably dangerous. Dr. Samuel Harding volunteered to accompany Timothy to the hospital and remained there for 3 months, documenting the boy's behavior and working with hospital staff to develop understanding of what they were dealing with. The resulting case study became one of the first systematic examinations of antisocial behavior in children, though it would not be published until decades after the events. Timothy adapted to hospital life with the same calculating intelligence he had shown on the farm. He quickly learned to mimic appropriate emotions and responses, convincing several staff members that he was making remarkable progress in overcoming his traumatic episodes. Timothy would cry convincingly when discussing his crimes, express remorse that seemed genuine, and display what appeared to be authentic gratitude for the care he was receiving. But Harding observed that Timothy was merely studying the people around him, learning to manipulate them more effectively. The boy had created what amounted to a comprehensive catalogue of human emotional responses, and he could reproduce these signals with remarkable accuracy despite feeling none of the underlying emotions himself. The subject displays remarkable cognitive abilities coupled with complete absence of genuine emotional response. Dr. Harding wrote in his detailed reports, "He has learned to simulate normal human reactions with sufficient skill to deceive casual observers. But extended observation reveals the performance to be entirely artificial." Timothy understands happiness as the face people make when they want something good to continue, and sadness as the face people make when they want others to help them. But he has never actually experienced either emotion himself. Dr. Harding's evaluation also revealed the extent of Timothy's violent fantasies and future plans. When the boy believed he had gained Dr. Harding's trust by pretending to be fascinated by the scientific approach to studying human behavior, Timothy began sharing ideas for future experiments that made his past crimes seem almost restrained by comparison. He has developed elaborate scenarios for testing human responses to various forms of psychological and physical torture. Dr. Harding reported confidentially, "His plans demonstrate remarkable creativity and attention to detail, as well as a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. If he were allowed to mature and gain additional resources, he would likely become one of the most dangerous individuals in American history." The hospital records show that Timothy remained at the facility for 18 months. During that time, several unexplained incidents occurred that bore the hallmarks of Timothy's methods. Other patients were found dead in circumstances that suggested accident or natural causes, but which showed patterns of deliberate planning when examined carefully. 3 elderly patients died from apparent heart failure after interacting with Timothy, though all had been in relatively good health previously. 2 younger patients suffered what appeared to be accidental falls that resulted in serious injuries. But both incidents occurred in areas where Timothy had been seen earlier in the day. Most disturbing were the reports of patients who,